I think what we're worrying about we should drop. That doesn't mean we can, It's sometimes very difficult. As I've tried to be public with when it's difficult for me. When in non-dual practice we're talking about, in presence practice, we're talking about letting things go. It doesn't mean not attending to things. It doesn't mean not addressing things. It means letting your holding on to a belief, letting that go.
But isn't it also a belief that we need to maintain the things we have?
Yeah, if you have a strong belief that I have to maintain all the things I have, you should let that go. Because we don't have to maintain them all, and we can't. And they'll eventually all dissipate, as will our own bodies and minds. So we can't take care of everything, and we can't maintain everything. And if we're okay with that, we'll be much more free. And yet we can maintain whatever we're drawn to maintain, and whatever we can maintain joyfully. So, it's really the gauge of what we need to work on is really what we're suffering with, I think, as far as I can tell. I mean, when you're suffering, that's a signal that something needs to be addressed. Sometimes it's not so clear what exactly needs to be addressed, but you know something needs to be addressed. So it's nice to arrange situations where you have less decisions. I think if you then have doubt about whether that's healthy or unhealthy, see just how you feel about it. So if there's a part about biking in, at least sometimes biking in, that's joyful. And there's a part that's not so joyful or vital about taking a car or motorcycle every time, then you might be motivated to fix the bike and bike in sometimes. But if you're not joyful about biking in, and that's the reason you're not fixing it, maybe that's okay. It's tricky because sometimes we have mixed feelings about it. When we actually do something, it's pretty joyful, but we have some resistance to doing it beforehand. So we have to experiment and find out.
I'm reminded of when we go on the wilderness trips, there's been a lot of occasions when people have put up some resistance towards the beginning, and then they are, they feel grateful that they were pushed towards doing it.
Mm-hmm. Persevered, yeah. But you have to be up for it. Like you have to, even though you have resistance, you also have to have inspiration. If the moving through resistance is because of a should, because of a sense of obligation and responsibility, then it's about your self-character, your self-idea, and it's going to be suffering. What we're following our actions according to our self-idea, there's going to be suffering involved. It doesn't mean our decisions will always be wrong or right, it's hard to say, but to the extent that it's about maintaining a self-character who's meeting or failing to meet other people's expectations or your own expectations, to the extent that it's for that, there's going to be suffering. Because that's uncomfortable. Living life according to the dictates of a character and their responsibilities. The direction of our practice is to live life according to the beauty of presence. Just the beauty of presence. And it feels really hard when we're estranged from that. You know? The more you've tasted the beauty of presence, when you're estranged from it and you can't seem to touch it, it's so difficult. That's what our heart wants, to return to that. Just the beauty of presence. What's happening? What's happening right now? It's far beyond you and your ideas. And to live there is very expansive and free. And to live according to the rules and regulations set up by the self, it's not so expansive and free. So that much we can know, right? I mean, does that resonate?
You mentioned that suffering can indicate that there is an identification with the character which has certain agenda. Why is the converse not true? For example, if when experiencing joy, why is that not the character experiencing joy? In other words, why does the character disappear when joy is experienced or when there is absence of suffering?
That's what joy is. So, the character is a contraction of experience and separation, and that hurts. It can be very subtle. It can be very subtle that it hurts. Just not as expansive and fully alive as it could be. But you know, things are going okay. Or it can be quite pronounced that it hurts. And things are not going so well. And there's confusion. But our natures, what's really happening is always presence. And that's our nature, and it's unlimited. And it's unknown, and there's just beauty there. It's just how it feels when we surrender to it. And when we're involved in our character, we're cutting that out to some degree, because we're focusing on accumulated beliefs and expectations and hopes and fears and all those kind of things. We can go into time. And identity is just a small cut-off thing compared to our experience happening. So when we're giving energy into our identity, we're cut off from that expansive, that letting go into happening itself. So to say, why doesn't the character experience joy? I mean, relatively speaking, the character can be happier or sadder, it's usually depending on conditions, because that's what the character is involved with. But even good conditions will soon pass and are not as satisfying as one would hope. And it turns to bad conditions, and then it's difficult. So if your attachment is to the character, there's always going to be limitation. You can appreciate the character arising as a phenomenon, but keep some kind of awareness. Just that awareness is happening beyond the character. We have another visitor. So the character being a limitation, the character can't open to full joy, because full joy is dropping the character. Because keeping the rules and beliefs of the character is itself heavy and limited and cut off. You're your own little person, and you're isolated from all the other people and nature and whatever's happening. But, our character is wired in there so deeply. It's very hard sometimes. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's very hard to let go of the character. You don't even know what the character is. Maybe I should bring up, if no one had asked a question, I would bring up the next story in the Zen story series.
Sure.
But it's kind of apropos.
What's that mean?
Appropriate to what we're talking about. Of course, they all are. But maybe particularly. So, last time we talked about Bodhidharma and Emperor Wu. So usually it's said after meeting Emperor Wu, Bodhidharma went to sit in a cave for many years. A remote part of North China, kind of dry part, called Mount Song. Some reworking of the story, he went there first and later went to Emperor Wu, so we don't really know how it happened. But when he was sitting or living in his cave, slowly a little bit of a reputation went out that there was some ascetic monk practicing there, and a Chinese monk who maybe had done a lot of training and study, but really maybe had some clear experiences too, but was caught in a really uncomfortable place and was suffering. And so that motivated him to hear about this unusual monk, Bodhidharma, and he thought, maybe he can help me. I'm in distress. I don't know who else can help me. My studies of Buddhism doesn't seem to help so much. I don't know what meditation practices he had done, but he was having a hard time. And so he made the trip, probably a long, arduous trip, because Bodhidharma was pretty remote, but he made the trip to Bodhidharma's cave. And Bodhidharma wouldn't see him initially. He sat outside, asking to see him in the cold all night, and it's supposed to be snowing on him. You know. This is a legend, of course, and it's all exaggerated, but he was determined, is the point. And it's even said at one point he cut off his own arm and presented it to Bodhidharma to show his complete determination. A little gruesome, but also I think not quite physically possible, or not usually possible. One arm cut the other through the bone, but maybe. Anyway, Bodhidharma finally came out and said, all right, what do you want?
Not, you better put a bandage on that.
Maybe it was bandaged already. I think there's some indication that this person, whose name was Huiko, something like that, was actually one-armed, and that's maybe how this legend got made up. But I'm not sure about that. Anyway, Bodhidharma said, what's wrong? And he said, my mind's not at peace. Please, Master, please, can you bring it to peace? And we can assume it really wasn't at peace. He was really distressed. And as most of you know, I've been having a somewhat hard time lately. So I can relate. And Bodhidharma said, okay, find your mind and bring it to me, and I'll put it at peace. So Huiko maybe closed his eyes, tried to find his mind. So maybe we can all try to find our minds that are not at peace right now. Close our eyes, just try to find our minds. Anyone find your mind?
Just a bunch of thoughts.
You can find thoughts temporarily, although you can't hold them. They come and they go. So Huiko said, as much as I look for my mind, I can't find it. Bodhidharma said, there, I've put your mind at peace. So this is very crucial to see. It's a thought that our mind's not at peace. It can be a repetitive thought, but it's a thought. There's no mind not at peace. It's just a thought. And in that moment, Huiko understood that very deeply. And so felt a relief. I've been dreaming about the mind not at peace all this time, and now I see it's just a dream. It's rising thoughts. And feelings and perceptions. Unpleasant feelings arise. It's not that they're not there. They arise and transform and pass. They might arise again. You switch with more pleasant thoughts, pleasant feelings. But there's no mind there. The sense that there's a mind or a me or a person or a character is simply a recurring idea that arises, and when you look at it, there's nothing there. All you can see is other recurring ideas. Awareness is happening, and it just has ideas arise in it. There's no solid thing there. And there's no solid thing there. You realize there's no person to worry about. There's just what's happening. And when you feel that deeply, it's a great relief. So that's our direction. There's always just presence happening. There's no actual thing there that's a problem. There's no actual problem there. There's just recurring thoughts that there's a problem. And feelings that go with those recurring thoughts. And it can get more workable when you see that there's no real solid thing there. But sometimes, the thoughts just keep coming and the feelings just keep coming, and it's hard. So we study these directions with humility. We can resonate with the truth of them, but it doesn't mean it's easy. Vayu had to cut off his arm. And if you take that as a metaphor, sometimes to be ready to really let go of the sense of a separate self, you have to really go through challenge. Maybe not everyone. But all our suffering, we can see, has to do with some belief that something is true through time. Something outside of this present awareness is true, and we have to deal with it. But really, when we look, all that's happening is this presence. And when we see that, we feel free. And when we believe in the something besides presence, in time, we suffer. We just have to notice that more and more. So if we go into time and we go into a belief and we don't suffer so much, it's just a practical reason to do it, to communicate and to get some task done. That's fine. When we believe something so strongly, we put so much investiture in something outside of present awareness as being true. We're divorced from present awareness. We're divorced from the joy of just being alive. We're consumed by this other thing apart from just present awareness, and that's painful. Yeah, to make it more positive, I would say he was willing to take on suffering himself because he had an insight that not only would it relieve his own mind, but it's part of the relief of the whole world if he could understand, if he could get beyond attachment to himself. Maybe just intuitively.
I'm gonna drop myself on your foot, and I'll tell you that's some heavy weight.
So I don't know. I mean, I hope none of us have to sustain physical injuries, and hopefully we can sustain as little mental injuries as possible. But we have to be willing to let go. And to learn to let go, sometimes you have to go through difficulty. You have to be willing to go through difficulties. It doesn't always tell you what decision to make is the problem, but you can always know that when you're not letting go of something, when you're grasping something and it hurts, it's a mistake. Like Sawaki Roshi's quote, when something weighs on your mind, it's wrong. In a succinct way. It's a very powerful teaching, so powerful. It doesn't necessarily, give you the answer, and you still have to go through some struggle, but you can. A lot of people think that something weighs on their mind is right. It's really weighty, but we should pursue it. We should believe in it, we should hold it. And this teaching is saying, no, there's something wrong if it weighs on your mind already. There's something wrong. There's something you have to let go of. So my trouble is sometimes with decisions is both sides seem, I know I'm holding on both sides, and I don't know which one to do. And when we get caught in thinking too much about it, as I sometimes do, we think that our figuring mind is going to solve it, and that's not really the solution. Our heart knows that. There's a little bit of thinking we have to do for practical matters, but to get out of that real stuck heart, suffering place, we have to find a way to be expansive and to feel the joy of presence again, and then out of that place make a decision. So that's what's tricky. So Bodhidharma Huiko went to see Bodhidharma. That was a good step to deal with his suffering. And I feel often, especially when we feel a lot of heaviness combined with isolation, which is what maybe I've been feeling, and what maybe a lot of people have been feeling. One way to try to feel some of the joy again, some of the expansiveness again, is to seek out community, seek out Sangha, seek out healthier practices, seek out help from a particular teacher or mentor, or therapist. Something that can let you feel that expansiveness of presence again. And then if a practical decision has to be made, you just make that from that place. But it's hard when you get stuck. But we have to accept that too. We have to accept this is what the universe did. It got us stuck. But if we don't believe it, we don't have to remain stuck. Just see it as phenomenon.
was that last thing you said? I didn't quite understand it. Like getting on the track. You thought you know.
The very last thing?
Yeah.
Well, we can make more of a problem with being stuck by having an attitude that we shouldn't be stuck, and it's really terrible or stupid of us that we got stuck, and then beat ourselves up. So we have to accept that we're stuck too as a natural phenomenon, and try to let go. Try to let go. Not by figuring it out or destroying the thing that you think is in the way, but simply by returning your attention to what's happening right here, the beauty of what's happening right here. Because when we feel that, we feel free and start to feel expansive. And then we can start fresh. Having intimate experience of that being difficult. I'm humble talking about it, and I think it's important to recognize ways to help us, to make us feel more comfortable, to make that step forward. The practices, but very much so the community, and trying to make our situation as healthy as possible.